Hi, Dr. Griffin. So good to see you. How are you?
Good morning. So great to see you too, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me for coffee today.
Yeah.
Be here with you. Yeah. Before we get going, I just wanted to start by congratulating you on earning your doctorate this year during a global pandemic while you were running a nonprofit organization as CEO, serving on I don't even know how many boards, leading in your community, on and on and on, a wife, a mother, a grandmother. Um, how did you do it? I mean, there's so many things, and yet you earned your doctorate. And I have so much respect for you, and I'm really excited for what you're going to do next with this new education and dissertation work.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. It was an important endeavor for me and my family and generational experiences that I wanted to be inspirational to my children and my children's children, my nieces, my nephews.
Wow. A lot of people, a lot
Yeah.
of people. So I was really excited to have coffee with you today to talk about your dissertation because I read it, and there's so much in your dissertation, and I'm really excited to have you share with us some of the things that you learned and experienced in writing it. But it really does focus on why there are so few African American Black women that achieve this executive leadership level that you have in nonprofit organizations. And so therefore your dissertation is really focused on studying that gap that exists for African American and Black women between that mid-level of management up into those executive ranks, and really trying to understand what happens to these women on their journey to the top. And before we dive in to discussing this, I just wanted to start by having you maybe share what inspired you to spend the last almost 3 decades focused on nonprofit leadership, specifically early childhood development, developing and providing educational programs to youth, and advancing equity in education.
Yes. Well, my first career job was in early learning. I actually was hired on by a clinical psychologist to help with his early learning program. He was running a state funded childcare program in the city of Long Beach, California. And he inspired me to want to help the mothers in those programs be able to
Mhm.
build their knowledge and their skills and their awareness around how to work with their children, how to be a community together and support each other. So that was my first body of work in my career path, helping other women to be successful in how they raised their children, but mainly how they did that raising, that child rearing
Yes,
together. Yes, as a community.
yes.
Mhm.
Wow. So that's what set you on this journey.
Yes, really
And
set me on this journey.
yes. So what ultimately pulled you towards wanting to complete your doctoral work in organizational leadership?
Well, I chose organizational leadership because I have worked in a variety of organizations. As I shared, my first career job was an early learning program. I worked in several companies. And what I consistently have seen is that there's organizational development that's structured within those communities, but rarely is it centered around the experiences of women of color, and then even more central African American women. So the career pipeline that we should be able to experience that would lead us to pursuing executive level roles is typically not there within organizations.
Wow. So you're saying that the structure is in place to build leaders and organizations in your own personal experience, even prior to your research, was that it didn't really fit who you were
Yes,
in those organizations.
yes,
Wow.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and most organizations, if you were to go in and look at their succession plans,
Mm-hmm.
corporations, you see a white male, the successor is typically another white male. might be a white woman, but very rarely in the nonprofit sector,
Yes.
where the majority of leaders are white women, but serving majority communities of color, which is what I discovered in my research. And the pipeline isn't set up for the succession to be leaders of color who would represent the communities that they're actually serving.
Mm, mhm. So it's very clear to me why you decided to go and learn and study and work to change these systems and structures. So the women coming in behind you have more of a pathway to the top.
Yes,
Wow,
yes.
that's so inspirational. So in your study, you specifically focused on studying African American and Black women in in our area, the Pacific Northwest, who, like you, have achieved this level of executive leadership. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so, when you met with these women and talked to these women, what were some of the things you found out or learned with these leaders? Things that they did to also achieve this level, in spite of all of those obstacles that they faced along the way and that you faced getting to where you are in your current role.
Yes, the most important part of my work was the direct research, working with women of color, Black women actually, and learning about their experiences and hearing their stories. And so I chose a phenomenological study because that is structured to hear what phenomenon impacted their experiences as they were working towards becoming executive level leaders in their organizations. And what they shared with me was some of them actually had a relationship early on in their career that helped inspire them, encourage them, move them along their career path. Others had what I talk about as self-efficacy. So they had a determination within themselves that that is what they were going to pursue in spite of whatever was thrown at them, in spite what the odds were for them. And then there were others who just never even made it yet on that path, right? They
Mhm.
had aspirations, they had the self-efficacy, but they kept running up against barriers that
Yes.
would block them and stop them from achieving those goals.
Mm, mm. So to take one of the research questions directly from your study that you use to do your research, what strategies, environments, and resources support African American Black women in attaining and retaining executive leadership roles in the nonprofit business sector?
Yes. So also in talking to these women, I asked them about their environments and what environments they found themselves experiencing, as well as what environments they believe would help them be successful. And so what I heard was spaces where there was great communication, open communication, where they were actually able to share freely about what their hopes and dreams were, what their vision was for the organization, and then to actually be heard by other leaders in their organization or the board of directors or donors, and so that they could pursue the goals that they had for the organization. They also were looking for environments that were open to them bringing their whole selves into the organization. So not needing to what we call code switch, like leave themselves at the door and speak the language, be a part of the culture that is really set up for white leaders to be successful, but to really bring themselves, how they talk, how they view the world, how they have experienced the world into that space to truly help the systems and help the participants that they're serving.
Mhm. So really, one of the major things that you learned in your study or showed in your study is that organizations need to embrace the authenticity of Black women for who they are and learn how to create space that where we can really tap into the amazing talent that Black women have. And as a result, I mean, its research has proven that when organizations do this well, it hits their bottom line. I mean, there's a direct correlation to profitability. And so that's what it can feel so frustrating at times is like, well, you see the direct correlation. So aren't people and organizations doing more to do this? So I really hear what you're
And, yeah, and many organizations are touting they're doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, but don't really fully understand what that means. Diversity is how many people, right? How many people of color are you allowing to be at your executive table, right? The equity is, do they actually have a voice that's their authentic voice at that
saying.
table? And then the inclusion is that they are included in the decision making at every level. They're included in the strategizing. They're included in the visioning for that organization. And so I think many organizations stop at the diversity, right? I have a Black woman at this table. That's good enough. Check that box, right? And
Yeah,
so that's one of the pushes that I have from my dissertation is to make sure that organizations understand what an environment looks like that is truly diverse, that's truly equitable, that's truly inclusive of all voices in the leadership roles.
right. And being able to really determine if it's there or not. And it sounds like it's um, that leaders in power looking at it from their lens of being white and saying it looks great, but the people they're not talking to are the people that you specifically talked to in your study to understand how they felt, and really that staying connected and creating that intentional conversation and space seems like a critical component. What I loved about your dissertation so much, Angela, I have to tell you, I had to read it 2 times to understand it, and I want to read it a third time. But really, you hit this from both an organizational lens and organizational leadership perspective, and you looked at the human, the individual person. So a moment ago, you mentioned self-efficacy. And so can you tell us a little bit more about self-efficacy and more specifically about what you learned in your research about self-efficacy? Because I found this part so interesting.
So what I learned about self-efficacy is mainly using a theory that focuses on what self-efficacy looks like in a career pathway. And so it's being able to see yourself
Mhm.
as achieving a specific goal in your career. And
Yeah.
so if you see yourself as an executive director, then what are the steps you need to be able to take in order to achieve those goals? And every single time a barrier comes, someone blocks you, someone stops you, you don't get the promotion, you don't get the job that you applied for, then it impacts your self-efficacy, it impacts your self-will and self-desire to keep pursuing that thing. Right.
Mhm.
And so that's what I saw in my research. The women who did not go all the way to their goal of becoming an executive director, it was because their self-efficacy was negatively impacted by their experiences.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. And their experiences are unique to them because they're women, right? So
Yes,
you have the gender or sexism that exists, and then they're African American.
yes,
So the intersectionality of race and gender, um,
yes,
and those interactions over time just hitting them and keeping them down in their
yes,
careers. And it's interesting, as an executive coach, I coach a lot of people, and men and women, on self-efficacy related things. And so I'm familiar and I've experienced a lot of those journeys with my clients. But hearing you say that, and when I read your dissertation, it's just so, I felt so much emotion thinking like every step you take, you get one step ahead and then boom. And
you
just
have 5
thinking about
steps.
my own life and like if I would have been strong enough to go on too, right? And um just I feel so much emotion about that. And you know, anyways, well, I I'm really uh looking forward to seeing how your work, your research evolves and the impacts it will make on the world. So in your role as an executive coach, where do you plan to focus your education expertise, and experience. What does this next chapter in your career and life look like?
Yes. So I had some recommendations that came out of my research, which then led to me wanting to actually be in a role where I could put into practice those recommendations. And
Ah,
so one is working with individual leaders on their career pathway, setting goals, setting action steps towards becoming executive directors, learning the culture of their organization, and then also building their self-efficacy to stay in there and
yeah,
stay in there. I identify that there's external forces and internal forces, right? And so internally, leaders of colors need sponsors. They need someone in that organization, whether it's a board member, it's their current executive director if they're working towards becoming an executive director, or it could be I'm a coworker, but they need sponsors who will speak up on their behalf, who
yes,
will help them be more visible, who, when they're in a meeting and they say something, that person will repeat back what
mm,
they said, giving them credit for what
yeah,
they said, right? I just heard Amy say, right? And so I work with them on identifying who are the sponsors within their organization. And if there's the opportunity to meet with that sponsor as well, then really making sure that individual has support. Externally is the mentorship, right? And so
right,
I really think, we talk about the village in the African American culture and some other cultures, but really identifying who are the leaders, the individuals who have achieved what you're aspiring to. So
yes,
I've achieved executive leadership, right? And so when I speak to an individual who's emerging on that pathway, I can share some of those experiences that I've had, some of that knowledge I have as a mentor to encourage them and support them. But I also encourage them to identify some additional people within their network
mhm,
who they can call on anytime
yeah,
they're feeling down, they have a question, they're unsure about something, or someone to celebrate with them, right? Because the
yes.
positive reinforcement is probably more important than the negative, right?
Right, because if you're getting all these hits all the time, and you need other people, you can get built up by other people. I know I have that community around me. I call you from time to time or another coach or whatever and say, hey, this just happened. What do you think? And it takes us working together and connecting together in that community. I would love to have you come back and have coffee and talk more about, go deeper a little bit on the sponsorship, the mentorship, and some very specific advice you have for organizations that are interested in doing this, but they aren't sure how to start or are maybe taking the wrong approach without knowing it. And would you be available to do that in the coming weeks? Maybe we can get back together and talk a little bit more on your experiences being a sponsor, being a mentor, and with hope that it will help more people on their career journeys.
Yes, I would love to do that. I think it's important to really understand some practical experiences that individuals are having, as particularly emerging leaders of color. That's really where my specialty lies, but then also working with boards as they are wanting to hire on an executive leader of color. So most
Mm,
definitely, I
yes,
will come back and share.
yes. Helping navigate the board through that process.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Griffin, I just say thank you so much. And I'm very excited that you are a resource for our clients. Anyone that is interested in doing this work, learning from you, we are excited to connect you to them.
Thank
So
you. Thanks
thank
for
you for
having me
being
on
here
it.
with me.
Thank
Take
you.
care.